All right. Well, um, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here and joining us this Wednesday afternoon. My name is Jillian Greenberg. I'm a climate planner at the Met Council, and I am here with Erin Brueggemann, who is a senior grants administrator, and we'll be sharing some information today about the Met Council's new community tree planting grants and um, answering questions that you may have towards the end. But before we get started, we wanted to learn a little bit more about who all was joining us today. So you'll notice that a poll was just started. You should be able to access it on your screen or in the chat. And if you just want to share a little bit more about who you are and why you're here, that would be great. Oh, okay. Yeah, Carrie and Gail, sorry about that. We're not sure why that might be happening, but thank you for being here. We'll look on our end to see if we can fix that. But um, the poll is just asking if what role you're attending today, um, and why you're here. So if you want to answer those questions in the chat, feel free, but we'll also make sure to have a chance to check in with everyone as we get further into the webinar. We have a good amount to cover today, so I'll get started, but feel free to fill out the poll still if you have access and are just joining. Today, we are going to start by walking through the fundamental program information that you would need as a prospective applicant to apply to this grant. We will walk through program information, eligible applicants and expenses, how to apply, and talk through some applicant resources. We'll talk through the review criteria and process, and then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. As a few housekeeping items, we are recording this webinar and we'll be posting the recording to the web page for the grant after we finish today. You are welcome to ask questions throughout the webinar in the chat. Feel free to add questions there as they come up. We'll also have Q&A time at the end where you can come off of mute and ask questions that you may have. And if we don't get to a question in the chat during the presentation, we'll also answer it at that point. So we'll start with some high-level program information and then get into more of the details. But on this slide, you see the program purpose as defined in state statute. So this program is new this year at the Met Council because the state of Minnesota legislature directed the Met Council to develop this program and guided the program towards these purposes, which are removing and planting shade trees on public land to provide environmental benefits, replacing trees lost to forest pests, disease, or storms, and establishing a more diverse community forest better able to withstand disease and forest pests. So all projects under this grant must address these purposes. The state statute also included program priorities. So there are two priorities. The first one is focused on projects removing and replacing ash trees that pose significant public safety concerns. And the second one is projects located in a census block group with a supplemental demographic index score in the 70th percentile or higher within the state of Minnesota. The supplemental demographic index score referenced in this priority is a score from the Environmental Protection Agency's Environmental Justice Screening Tool, and it combines 5 factors: income, persons with disabilities, education level, English speaking level, and life expectancy. And so these 5 factors are combined into one index that we'll refer to as the SDI, and it's intended to provide a perspective on potential community vulnerability. So projects that address both of these priorities will be most competitive in this grant process, and we'll talk through how that shows up in the review and scoring process in a little bit later in this webinar. Here you'll see some key program elements. The first one being eligible applicants. All cities, townships, counties, and regional park agencies are eligible to apply to this grant opportunity. Private or nonprofit organizations are not eligible, but as applicants, but they're encouraged to work with eligible entities to partner on and apply for funding. The Met Council has $2.5 million to award this grant cycle, and grant applications can range in project amounts from $10,000 to $500,000. There's no match requirement as a part of this grant. Here you see some information about eligible and ineligible activities as part of this grant opportunity. There's more details about all of this in the Notice of Funding Availability, which is available on the grant webpage. But overall, eligible funds are tied to the statute language that created this program, including the program purpose. So eligible uses of funds include professional contracts for technical assistance or project implementation, staff time for grantee staff qualified for project work, site preparation and planting materials, climate adapted trees, and maintenance and establishment costs during the grant period for trees planted using grant funding. Ineligible uses of funds are shown on the right side of this screen, and there's also a longer list in the Notice of Funding Availability. In general, these are uses that are less tied to the purpose of the program. So for example, treatments for maintaining existing ash trees are not an eligible use of fund because it doesn't fall under removing and replacing ash trees. So we encourage you to explore the Notice of Funding Availability if you have questions about this. The program timeline is up on the screen now. You'll notice some key dates, including webinar 2, where we are right now, March 26th. The application period ends on April 16th at 3 p.m. It's a Friday. The rest of April and into May will be time when a review panel will be evaluating applications and bringing recommendations of projects to fund to the Metropolitan Council. And we anticipate that grant agreements will go out to successful applicants in the early summer. The last date we flag here is the end of the grant term, June 30th, 2027. We are not anticipating being able to provide extensions for this funding. So we ask that you keep this in mind as you scope any project that you're applying to and scope it to something that you can implement over the course of about 2 years. I'm now going to pass this over to Erin, who's going to walk through how to apply.
Thank you, Jillian. I'll just make a note to Paul in the chat who's mentioning troubles viewing the display. And if anyone else is having a trouble with that, if you could let us know in the chat. I think it might be worth trying to leave and come back, Paul. I'm not sure. All right, next, I will walk us through how to submit an application and review each of the components of a complete application. On our webpage at the bottom is this image you'll see up on the screen here. There's a stack of blue bars. And if you click on the How to Apply bar, you will find all the materials that you will need to submit an application. And I will walk through those now. All right. We use an online system for our applications and our grant administration called Web Grants. So your first step in applying is to ensure that you have a user account in Web Grants. If you've used Web Grants with the Met Council in the past, even if you were at another organization at the time, you can simply update your profile information to your current role and organization if that applies. Any accounts that are created have to be approved by staff. So if you have tried to create a new account and it hasn't been approved, just reach out to me directly and I can make sure that that gets approved for you. Similarly, if you have other organizations or other employees at your applicant organization, excuse me, who will be involved in working on the application or managing this project, that could include like reimbursement requests or submitting reports, they must also have a Web Grants user account. So if you are kind of coordinating things, you can send me a list of anyone at your organization who will be signing up, and that way I can quickly approve these as they come in. All right, so the application, a complete application has 6 main components, all of which you will find in that How to Apply section on our webpage. This includes the application and budget questions. So this is a form, these are forms within Web Grants. Our application has questions designed to help our reviewers score your project along 5 criteria areas. So we'll go into great detail about those criteria areas shortly. But in case you don't have access to Web Grants now, you can see all of the application questions and the budget form in a Word document that we've created and is on this part of our webpage, including the instructions for answering them. Because we know that people are collaborating with others and because Web Grants doesn't allow you to auto-save your responses unless all the required questions have been answered on a form, you can use this Word document tool in your drafting process. Just to note, this document is only for drafting responses. Outside of Web Grants, you won't upload it. Okay. To aid in your planning, next we have a project timeline. So this is also to give our reviewers a sense of how your project will take place, including planting seasons, emerald ash borer season, and other considerations. So please give us a general time frame for your project activities. We've provided a Word doc that you can complete and save as a PDF to upload in Web Grants.
Erin, I'm gonna stop you real quick. We're gonna try sharing this presentation again and see if that helps with the issues people are having seeing the slides.
Good. Let me know if you'd like me to give that a try. If it doesn't work.
Are you seeing the timeline slide again?
Oh, we got a thumbs up from Paul. Yep.
Okay. We'll try that.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Thanks for letting us know. Okay, 3-year maintenance plan. The tree planting grants are only as effective as long as those trees actually take root and thrive. So newly planted trees, we know, require additional care and maintenance for 3 to 5 years after planting. And to that end, we're asking applicants to detail their plans to ensure that all trees that are planted with these funds mature into healthy plants with this 3-year maintenance plan worksheet. A note that tree maintenance during the project activity period is an eligible expense, but we recognize that grantees are expected to continue to meet these additional maintenance needs and care needs in the following years after planting new trees. So this form is part of kind of helping you plan for that and telling us how you plan to do that. This is a PDF fillable form that you will upload as a required attachment in Web Grants. Okay, so the next thing is intended tree species list. One program requirement is that any trees planted are climate adapted species to Minnesota. Additionally, to build a resilient and healthy community tree canopy, one of the most important factors is species diversity. Foresters at the DNR have compiled lists of tree species makeup for every community in Minnesota. So to help you select species that will create a healthy diversity within your canopy, you can reach out to DNR foresters to understand the mix of tree species that you already have. Further stipulations around this may be included in your grant agreement around specific species that would be excluded from kind of reimbursement or funding. On this document, there are other resources to help you identify appropriate species. This also is a PDF form that you will upload as a required attachment in Web Grants.
Yeah.
To help reviewers understand how your project relates to program priorities and program criteria, you will upload 2 documents that identify your project location. The first of these is the project map. The scoring factors map on our website shows census block groups in your community where residents experience high vulnerability or extreme heat or both. Using this map, you will download a map highlighting the census block groups where your proposed project activities will take place. We will talk more in depth about how to read this map and how to use this map and how you will create your project map shortly. Um, this is a downloadable thing from our website that you will use and you will upload with your application. Alongside the project map, you will also fill out and upload an Excel spreadsheet with your project sites. This includes a brief description of activities happening within census block groups in your community and allows reviewers to understand the scope of your activities with relation to program priorities and criteria. We've provided a spreadsheet for you to use for this purpose, and we'll go through this and the maps in depth shortly. These 6 items combine to make a complete application. You'll paste your narrative responses into web grants, and you will upload the rest of these as required attachments with your application. I'll pass it back to Jillian to talk about our criteria and scoring process.
Great. Thanks, Erin. So we have 5 criteria that each project will be evaluated on, and each of the 5 criteria are weighted equally. So we're going to walk through each of these 5 in detail, and what we'll be looking at is the criteria and scoring explanation PDF that's also linked on the web page. And so you can go back and reference this content again there as well. So the first criteria is project overview. This criteria is the only criteria that's broken into 4 subcategories in terms of how we're directing the review panel to score this criteria. So those are the 4 categories in the evidence column on the far right: project clarity and feasibility, demonstrated readiness to take on the project of the proposed scope, demonstrated expertise and capacity to achieve the desired outcomes, and demonstrated commitment to and an effective plan for tree establishment and maintenance. In the application components column, you'll see the different components of the application where we're directing reviewers to look to evaluate this criteria. So the project description narrative, the budget, the 3-year maintenance plan, and the project timeline are all components where we'd suggest reviewers look to be able to evaluate a project on this criteria. The second criteria is communications and collaboration. This criteria and all of the rest going forward are just broken down into 2 subcategories. For this criteria, the first category is a demonstrated plan to thoughtfully communicate with residents throughout the project timeline. And the second one is the degree to which applicant is collaborating with relevant community partners and stakeholders. For this first one, we're really looking to see and see a applicant's plan to let residents who may live near project work, to let them know that project work will be happening in their area before a tree might be planted on the same block as their house or in front of their house. And the second category is looking at partnerships, and these partnerships could be part of the project work in terms of subcontractors who are doing planting or maintenance work. It could also be partnering with neighborhood organizations to do the outreach. That's part of the communications element of the project. Next, we have project serves vulnerable communities. And this criteria is really pulling in that priority from the statute language around prioritizing projects that serve communities that may have higher vulnerability as defined by the Supplemental Demographic Index. So the first criteria is the degree to which the project is focused on census block groups prioritized by the SDI. This is specifically looking at the project map. And in the application, you'll be asked to provide an estimate of the total budget, which will go to block groups prioritized by the SDI. We're not asking for a high level of detail here, but just round to the nearest 5 or 10% to give reviewers a general estimate of the emphasis of the SDI block groups within the overall project scope. The second subcomponent of this criteria is demonstrated project outcomes are informed by and will benefit vulnerable communities. Um, Reviewers will be looking more at the narrative elements of the project description, the community characteristics narrative to evaluate this criteria. And projects can score points on this criteria whether or not they are located in block groups defined by the supplemental demographic index of areas of vulnerable communities. So you can still score points in this criteria even if you are not locating project activity in one of those block groups. There are a lot of similarities as we move into this next criteria, which is projects serve residents that experience extreme heat. You'll notice it's again divided into two subcategories. The first one is the degree to which the project focuses on census block groups experiencing extreme heat as measured by land surface temperature. Again, the mapping tool that we provide on our website will help applicants figure out where these block groups are in their area, and we'll be talking about the map more in a minute. The second subcategory here is demonstrated project outcomes are informed by and will benefit residents experiencing extreme heat. Again, with this subcategory, we'll be directing reviewers to look at the narrative elements of the application in addition to the map and spreadsheet for this. And so projects that are not located in a priority block group based on the map can still score points in this category based on the way they describe narratively how they're considering extreme heat in their project design and scope. Finally, we have tree canopy health and resilience. This is pulling in that project priority around addressing health of the tree canopy and ash in particular. So that first subcategory is the degree to which the project emphasizes addressing ash trees posing public safety concerns. And the second subcategory is demonstrated consideration of species diversity and canopy health in project design and species selection. And for this criteria, we are directing the review panel to look at narrative elements around tree canopy health and resilience, as well as the intended tree species list that you provide and the 3-year maintenance plan. So we'll now look at the scoring map in more detail and how that fits into project priority and scoring criteria.
Thanks, Jillian. So again, on our website, in those blue bars at the bottom of the web page for this is a section with an expandable section with our scoring factors map. Earlier, I introduced this map. Now that we've discussed the program criteria, we'll take a look at how to use this map as a tool in your proposal development. So the scoring factors map shows where in your community residents are facing high levels of community vulnerability and extreme heat, or both. Specifically, it color codes census block groups that are in the 70th percentile or higher for the supplemental demographic index that Jillian mentioned, or for SDI land surface temperature, or both. As you can see here, gray block groups meet neither of these thresholds. Green block groups are high land surface temperature. Yellow block groups are high SDI, and red block groups are high on both measures. This map will help you understand which tree planting projects might be the most competitive for this funding source. Some of that competitiveness comes from how these relate to the points you can earn in the criteria that Jillian just gave an overview of based on project location. And some of the competitiveness is based on meeting the 2 program priorities, specifically the one around community vulnerability, which determines our review order. So now we'll look at exactly how that works by looking at our review process. Our review process starts with council staff conducting a preliminary review of all the proposals to ensure completeness and eligibility. After that, staff will then place each eligible application into one of 3 tiers based on the program's legislative priorities around addressing ash trees and high community vulnerability. So tier 1 is applications that meet both legislative priorities. Tier 2 is applications meeting just one of them. And Tier 3 is applications that meet neither. Next, a review team will will read, score, and rank the applications in Tier 1, resulting in funding recommendations. As funds remain after the review of Tier 1, the review team will rank and recommend applications in Tier 2. And if funds still remain, may consider applications in the third tier, meeting neither priority. A note here that no applications receiving fewer than 50 of the 100 total points through the criteria will be awarded funding regardless of which tier they are in. So you might wonder, which tier will your application be reviewed in? Review tier is determined by whether your project will address ash trees, whether it's in a high SDI census block group, or both. So if it's in a high SDI block groups, those are the block groups on the map that are either red or yellow, and it addresses ash, it will be reviewed in Tier 1. If it's in low SDI block groups, those are the green or gray areas on the map, it will be reviewed in either Tier 2 or Tier 3, depending on whether it is also addressing ash. Because we have limited funds, it's entirely possible that funds will be depleted in Tier 1 or Tier 2. So we highly recommend that you focus your project location and activities so that will result in being reviewed in Tier 1, meeting both the ASH and the high SDI program priorities. I'll add that reviewers will be looking at the emphasis of your project. So simply having a small percentage of your total project in a high priority block groups may not work, may not be effective in the scoring process. Your project locations can also affect how many points you receive in the, through the scoring rubric. So projects with activities in the red, yellow, or green census block groups will receive additional points in the scoring process. Red and yellow projects with 70th percentile on the SDI or higher will receive extra points in the serving vulnerable communities criterion that Jillian outlined. And red and green project with high land surface temperature will receive additional points in the serving residents that experience extreme heat criterion. So the sweet spot for a project is one that has an emphasis of activities taking place in red census block groups on the map and also addresses ash trees. These projects will be reviewed in the first tier, and they'll be eligible for the most additional location-based points. So to help staff and the review team understand how your project relates to these priorities and criteria, you will be submitting 2 attachments identifying your planned project sites. After you've identified where your project activities will take place in a way that's a good fit for this grant, you will be making a project map. This is really very simple using our online scoring factors map. I will walk through this process here. So first, you will zoom into your community using the drop-down box in the upper right corner. I'll note here that counties or park implementing agencies working across multiple cities or towns will want to manually zoom into their part of the map. Using the drop-down to zoom will show you a map of all the census block groups that overlap with the boundaries of your city or town. Step 2, you will locate and click on all the census block groups where your project work is planned. When you select them, block groups will turn opaque. As you hover over a block group, you will notice that it shows you the last 7 digits of its GeoID code. This is helpful for filling in your project site spreadsheet, which I will discuss next. Step 3, with your project block group selected, reposition and zoom the map to have the precise view that you want to show on your submitted map. If you zoom in more, you can see more detail that is visible on the sort of underlying map. All right, step 4, finally, once the map highlights all the census block groups where project activities will take place, you can download it as a PDF at the bottom of the map, and then you will have an upload that looks very similar to this to upload into the WebGrant system. The map you submit does not need to show your entire community, but it should show all of your intended project locations. If you have multiple project sites spread across a large area, you can submit more than one of these maps, but we ask you to combine them into one PDF because we only have one upload field for this. I will note that if you have different maps as a product of your own internal planning that provide more detail that you would like to share with the review team, you are welcome to submit those as well. They can't be submitted as a substitute for these project maps that we have here. Additional maps can be uploaded as a single PDF up to 10 pages as an optional upload in WebGrants. Okay, so I mentioned the second half is the project site identification spreadsheet. So if your map shows up where your project will take place, the spreadsheet completes the picture by showing what is happening where. We provide a spreadsheet that you can use for this. First, you will filter by city, township, or county, and this will show only the block groups that have more than 6,000 square meters and are overlapping with your city or town, or with the city or town that's listed. Next, you will find the census block group geo-IDs that you identified on the map on the previous screen. Once you find them, you will mark an X in these rows in the project site column. And last, you will add a brief description of your activities in this block group area. These descriptions should connect to how you describe your project activities in your narrative. I'll note that this is the only required upload that we want is something other than a PDF. We're asking you to upload this as an Excel spreadsheet. You might wonder, what if my project scope and my project sites change after we are selected for funding? How accurate do our plans need to be at this stage? And I would say that our reviewers are looking for evidence that your project is well conceived, thoroughly planned, and of a realistic scope. And because project location plays such a big role in an application's competitiveness, any changes to scope or budget or location should be in line with your proposal. So if your location falls through, if you can select an alternate location in a similarly like coded block group within your community, that's a good idea. If staff determine that your changes are a significant departure from the original project, or that one that may have made the project less competitive during the selection process, these changes may require an amendment approval by the Met Council's Community Development Committee before any reimbursement for those changed activities. So for that reason, it's good to have a thoroughly vetted and realistic project, and to stay in touch with me throughout the life cycle of your grant to communicate any changes or challenges in advance so that I can help you identify options and avoid any surprises. I'll pass it back to Jillian.
Yeah, we just have a few last slides, and then we'll take some time to answer questions. So there are lots of resources on the webpage, but we wanted to start by sharing that we are happy to get questions from you all over these next few weeks as you're developing applications. We would much rather you email us to ask us a question than sit in uncertainty or feel unsure about how to approach any element of this project. So reach out to either of us and we'll get back to you promptly. Throughout the webpage, there are resources to help guide you in putting together an application. So this is the how to apply section of of the webpage, and you'll notice there's the notice of funding availability, the criteria and scoring explanation, which we walked through already, the draft application in a Word document format that Erin mentioned before. There's a guidance document to help create the project map and spreadsheet, as well as the map itself. And further down on the website that you can't see here on the screen, there's an FAQ section that we're updating with questions as we receive them. So there are answers already there, and we'll continue to add additional questions and answers over the next few weeks. So back to Erin.
Yeah, so I'll just, what is next? We have, the application is currently open. This is our second of 2 webinars. Again, as Jillian said, our application closes on April 16th. And Jillian, if you could advance the slide a couple bumps here. Then in late spring, after April 16th, late April, and throughout May, we're going to be engaged in review And then in June, it'll be going to our Community Development Committee and to the Met Council's council for approval. And then we're looking at late June, early July for grant agreements. And then between then and the end of the grant period is grant administration. And that is where you'll be working with me. I'll become your primary contact. So I'll invite your staff to an orientation to review next steps, reporting requirements, and reimbursement processes. If you're selected as a grantee, I'll be doing that around the same time that we're sending the grant agreements out. You are allowed to begin working on grant-funded activities anytime after the council approves grant recommendations, but we do really recommend that grantees wait until you have an executed grant agreement in hand to begin incurring eligible expenses. This is to protect everyone involved, including you and any contractors you may have. As you have expenses for the project, you will submit reimbursement requests, and every 6 months you will have semi-annual reports. We will stay in touch about amendments, challenges, or changes to your project. And finally, you will be responsible for submitting a closeout report within 6 months of completing your project or after June 30th, 2027. For each of these items, you will be responsible for providing documentation of expenses and activities, project updates, and progress towards the goals that you identify in your application. All right, I'm going to pass it. Oh, we have another poll. I'm not sure how well our polls are working.
Yeah, let's jump into Q&A.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that sounds good.
but
If you want to, yeah, we were curious to know at this moment how many of you think you might apply for the grant, and would just love to know if that's something that you're thinking is likely or possible at this stage. If you want to put that in the chat or do a thumbs up or something, or thumbs down, that would be interesting to us. And then we do have some time for questions and answers. I'll turn that over to Jillian.
yeah, Mark, I see your hands up. If you're able to come off mute, feel free to um, jump in with your question, or feel free to put it in the chat if that's better for you.
I see a question here from Quinn. How specific do activities descriptions need to be? And I think that was in relation to the spreadsheet. Specifically, like, do the number of trees planted and removed need to be specified per census block groups? And my response to that was yes, we are looking for approximate numbers per census block group, which overall numbers are necessary anyway for budget planning, of course, but that is part of kind of the review process and understanding how your project aligns with program priorities. So that is important, and that's where I was saying that if substitutions or changes happen after that point, we're looking for them to be kind of not significantly different from what you've proposed.
Yeah, and Sadie, I see this question about a project located within a park. We are interested in the map that includes which census block group it's in. So we will ask that you submit a project map using the online mapping tool. And if the park spans multiple census blocks, you can select multiple census block groups, highlight all of the ones that are relevant. If you have an actual project map that is based on the park boundaries, you're welcome to submit that as an additional optional map that you submit with your application, but we ask that every applicant submits a project map using the mapping tool. Feel free to follow up if you have additional questions about that. And Rachel, I see your hand up if you want to come off of mute.
Hi, thanks. And apologies if you answered this already. I had to step out my office for a minute, but I was wondering about the requirement for stock and why there is a requirement that no bald and burlap trees can be used.
Yeah, this is the, um, this also gets to Dustin's question, so I just wanted to flag that as well. In the notice of funding availability, there are certain types of trees that are ineligible for uses of funds, and it is largely related to the using funds efficiently. So purchasing trees that efficiently use our funds across as many trees as we can plant as possible, and also have um, long-term success of being planted and living healthy lives. So that's the overarching explanation for why those trees are, or there are some types of trees that are ineligible there.
Okay,
Um,
I guess I'm wondering because our contract, we pay the same thing whether our contractor supplies containerized trees or a B and B tree. It's based on the caliper inch versus the stock type, so we aren't paying more. I just am concerned that we wouldn't actually be able to get the stock as, bare root or containerized that are quality, the quality that we're looking for. So I was also, I guess, since I'm off of mute, wondering about the species list that was included, that the DNR, it linked to the DNR's website. Is that the only list for climate adaptive species that you all are working off of?
um, no, well, okay, so first, on the first half of your question, we can follow up more about the stock type questions, regarding the species list. So in the intended species list that you submit, we've listed out the ones that, so that you can just check off the ones that are in that resource from the DNR for climate adapted species for this area. But there's a place for other. So if there are additional species or tree species that you would like to plant using grant funding, you can add other species there. So it's not an exhaustive list, but it's a starter list to help direct applicants to climate adapted species and ensure that that's where funds are being used. We are required by statute that all tree species planted with this funding are climate adapted species. So we would, and in that intended species list, you'll be asked to provide a very brief rationale for additional species that you're thinking of including if they aren't on that list.
Thanks.
Julian, I'm seeing Mark has his hand raised, and there are a few questions in chat.
Thank you. I think I'm off or able to be heard now. Great. This is probably self-evident, but Met Council and the legislature appropriating the funds probably was working on the parameters of this grant a long time ago. Now it's live, has the scoring criteria. Hopefully you won't be waiting the scoring too much for those of us that will be replanting in areas that had ash, because I saw that some of the description for the reviewers was ash or included ash removals. I think most of us have all the ash down because the areas we're planting in that are going to align with this grant opportunity are along sidewalks, boulevards, trails, maybe in parks. They're all down. So hopefully you'll be recognizing that they're replacing ash, but we're not taking ash down because they are long gone. Any of that make sense?
Yeah, that does. And so, and this I think also connects to Quinn's question. So I'll try and address all of them in my answer here. But yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I think I would recommend, if you are planting trees in an area where ash removal has occurred before the grant period starts, there's narrative questions that you answer about removing ash trees and about tree canopy health. I would just recommend including in your response something about how you are planting trees in areas where ash trees have been previously removed, so that reviewers can take that into account as they're evaluating your application. And then to Quinn's questions, replacements, yes, so if you remove a tree, we ask that you replace a tree in the vicinity of the tree that was removed. There's a bit more specificity about that in the notice of funding availability, and planting can be done without tree removals, but not the opposite. So you can't remove a tree without replacing it. But yes, definitely planting can be done without removals. And yeah, Mark, did that answer your question? Do you have an additional question?
Yeah, it sure did. I mean, this grant doesn't have a match per se. So I just wanted to kind of clarify, because I think we're all in that situation where we're probably done with removals, especially in these high sensitive areas. So maybe we'll include a picture of a stump when we download or upload our app.
Yeah, just making that clear in your application, I think, is a great idea to help reviewers understand. Yeah, Dustin, feel free to come off of mute.
Yeah, are non-native trees allowed? Doesn't look like that list has any non-native trees.
No, well, only climate adapted species are allowed. So if there's it's unlikely that a non-native species would be allowed to be planted. If you want to talk about a specific species sometime and connect with us about that, we're happy to talk with you and
Yeah, I just want to say
talk
the
with the
DNR's
DNR.
list is pretty bad. This isn't a
Okay.
great list of trees for urban. I mean, this is a lot of the similar species. We're supposed to have a good species representation in the urban environment. And this is, I mean, there's like a bunch of oak, maples that don't do well in the urban environment. So just saying.
Yeah, if there are species beyond this list that you want to plant, we don't see this list as exhaustive. So we're happy to work with you and on figuring out what those are. We do just have to make sure it's a climate adapted species, because that's what is in state statute associated with this funding.
Perfect. Thank you.
So looking through some of the questions in the chat, Carrie, I think that's a great question, and I think if there's, I think I would look at if there's an area nearby, but maybe is not the exact spot where a tree is removed. We recognize it doesn't make sense to plant trees where there are underground utilities that would affect that spot or make a tree not able to survive in that spot. So we encourage you to look nearby and can work with you about what that looks like. I think there's like some flexibility around that as long as it's in the area where the tree was removed. And there is a 1-for-1 tree planted to tree removed requirement in most areas where this funding would be used. So to Polly's question, so the stipulation around where trees can be planted or removed is that it's on public land. So we leave that up to each community to and trust you all direct your project funding to public land. So it does expand beyond parks or just Minneapolis parkland. But happy to follow up on that if that's helpful. And I'm scanning through to see if we've missed anything, Aaron, but if you've caught one that we haven't answered yet.
There was a question from Mary about what constitutes qualified in the phrase from eligible expenses, staff qualified for tree removal and planting work.
Oh, yes, thanks, Mary. Great question. So this is getting at the background of staff in general. We look to you all to hire foresters. We don't ask to receive like previous certificates confirming certain qualifications around staff or contractors that are doing this work, but look to you all as the applicant to ensure that either your staff or the contractors that you work with have certifications or other relevant and necessary qualifications to implement the work and ensure that trees are planted correctly and maintained correctly to survive and thrive wherever they're planted. Dustin, to your question about the speed, I think, Aaron, do you want to answer that one?
Dustin, I'm curious, so reimbursements are made once you incur and pay for your expenses. You can submit a reimbursement claim, and we're paying those within 30 days of receiving them if there are no questions or problems with the claim. So it's usually a pretty short time frame to receive your reimbursements, but I'm not sure what sort of timeline you are thinking about or had specific questions about, or if that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm just dealing with a current grant that my finance department kind of would like to close out the books shorter than a 3-year time span. Sort of like incurring that cost and being able to recoup it within that time frame.
Yeah, okay, so you can.
PNR is the one I was dealing with currently, just working to try to get that. But whether there could be something worked out between like the follow-up maintenance still happening and check-ins, but the financial something or other being able to be transferred sooner than that, I guess. I don't know enough about how the finance department wants it, but generally having those funds kind of sitting out there more than like a carryover is difficult, I guess.
I see. So you're reimbursed as you incur and pay for expenses related to the grant. So you can submit reimbursement requests up to monthly. We ask people to submit at least every 6 months so that things don't pile up too long. So it's a pretty it's a process that sort of follows your pace on progress on the project.
Okay. So if I do have a contractor do planting, I would be able to do reimbursement on those funds ahead of the 3 years.
Oh yes,
Gotcha.
You're receiving reimbursement throughout up to monthly for expenses that you are incurring and paying through that time. Okay. There's usually a final fee, like the final reimbursement is withheld until we receive all your closeout documentation that reports on like all of the outcomes of the grant, how everything went, and includes final financial reporting, all of that. So the final payment is sometimes held, and that can be like maybe up to 10%, but that is just dependent on you submitting the final paperwork. And then after that point, it's a 35-day reimbursement timeframe. And that doesn't, it's not necessarily tied to that June 30th of 2027. It's throughout. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Mary, to your question about eligible expenses, so tree establishment costs are eligible, and starter fertilizer would be included as an establishment cost there. So yes. And then, Erin, I'm wondering if you want to answer this question about from Sadie about forms and
Sure, I'll just repeat it so everyone can hear it. It's, did you say that if we were awarded an amount that we would need to do a project update every 6 months? Is there some way that you will go by or someone simply reaching out? So yeah, every 6 months we will be sending you a reporting form that's just like, here's the update, here's our cash flow for, our expected cash flow on this grant for the remainder of the grant life. It's not super onerous. It is really just an opportunity for us to check in and make sure things are going still going well, and see if there are any issues that we need to proactively put our heads together on. So, and that would be prompted by me. Yes.
Ben, I see your hand up, and I'll just note, Erin and I can stay on for a little bit. So if you have to jump at 3, thank you so much for being here. Feel free to reach out to us with questions, but we'll stay on. And Ben, if you want to come off mute, and then Simon, we'll get to you next.
Hi, yes, so kind of going off of Kari's question, if you don't have enough space, uh, I got a shade tree grant for DNR, and I'm finding the same problem as I got fiber that's being put in boulevard areas, so in full neighborhoods taking up entire right of ways, and I'm running out of room. So how close is close when you say the tree needs to be, if the tree is getting replanted one for one? The area I'm kind of looking at, one, I got 3 parks. One is in the dead center of the area that we might be going for. I got 2 other parks that are roughly a quarter mile or less from that area, but they're not in that demographic. That's probably where many of the trees would go if I can't put them in the right of way. Is that going to affect replanting problems or reimbursement problems?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and thanks for following up about that. I think a couple things I'd suggest on this. So first, in terms of location, what we look at specifically in this application, because of the geographic prioritization that comes along with this program, is that the trees are planted in the same census block group as the tree removal is happening. So that would be important that if it's being if a tree is coming down in one area and being replanted in a different area, that it's still happening all within the same census block group. And then I think we're happy to work with you in the situations where new utilities are limiting the how close the replanting can be. So I think being thoughtful, spelling out your approach to that, suggesting even in your application narrative that this is where the removals will be, and we're planting here because of these reasons, and it's this distance from the removal site. Just helping the review panel understand all of that in your application, I think will be helpful, and it won't be something that you'll be penalized for because you can't do a replant in the exact same location as the tree is being removed from. So yeah, we understand that those limitations exist. Feel free to follow up or yeah, come off mute, Ben, if that didn't answer your question, but Simon, we'll jump to you next.
Sure, thank you. I work for the city of Bayport, and since it appears that Bayport's not in a targeted area, I want to be mindful of the time and effort required to apply. Realistically, would an application from our city have a chance of being funded, or would there be a significant disadvantage? The only qualifying area within our borders is the state prison, which we don't have access to. Would that limitation make our application less competitive, I assume? Can you just share some insight on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's true that not having prioritized areas does make the application less competitive. it doesn't necessarily mean that it wouldn't be funded. This is the first time we're running this program at the Met Council, and so we don't have a perfect sense of how many applications we expect to receive and what will be funded, whether we'll be funding projects that only meet both priority areas, whether we'll be funding projects that meet one or the other priority area, and whether we'll be funding projects that don't meet any priority areas. The one consideration I would include in your thinking about whether to apply is whether there are ash tree removal and replanting work that you could do, because the two criteria that affect your where your application is reviewed in the process is the community vulnerability criteria and ash tree. So even if you don't have areas in your community that are prioritized for community vulnerability, if you're working on ash tree removal and replanting, your project could still be reviewed in a tier 2 and scored in tier 2. And so I don't want to provide like black and white, can't answer black and white, yes or no, it would or wouldn't be competitive, but those would be some of the factors I'd consider when putting together an application or deciding whether to put together an application. Erin, do you have anything to add on that? Simon, feel free to follow up if you have additional questions about that.
For sure. I appreciate that, certainly. Thank you.
Yeah. Erin, are there other questions from the chat that we haven't gotten to yet?
I am not seeing any other questions. I will echo Jillian's note that we're really happy to receive questions every day throughout this process from you. If you have them, we'd rather you email us frequently than sit on questions and be uncertain throughout this process. So please do feel free to reach out to us if something kind of comes to light that is confusing or that you have questions about throughout applying. We are both here as resources to you for that purpose. Yeah, and I am not seeing any other questions in the chat. Oh, something new just popped in. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dustin. Appreciate your presence here today. Thank you all for being here with some good questions. It's always better when people have questions that everyone can benefit from hearing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and so with that, we'll wrap up. As Erin mentioned, feel free to reach out to us. We'll also be updating the FAQ with the answers that we provided to you all today. So you may see language and responses to those show up there as well. There's lots of resources, a demo video and more on the webpage. So we suggest you check that all out. And I think that's all for today. So thanks so much for your time. We look forward to hearing from you if you have questions, and I hope you have a good afternoon.